Hello, everyone. This is Mr. Brass, and today is the first episode of the Brass Exchange. And for my debut guest, this is a person that me and my old friend interviewed previously on serial killing. Today we're going to be talking about men's rights. Say hello to Laura Whittington.
Hi.
All right. In case for those that don't know you, can you tell the audience a bit about yourself?
Not a whole lot to tell. Stay-at-home mom, got a 12-year-old daughter, been married 6 years now. Uh, Pro-life,
Uh,
gun rights advocate, all that kind of stuff.
but you mean the tiny tyrant?
Yes, the tiny tyrant. She is growing, so she's not quite as tiny as she used to be, but
Yeah. Um, you haven't been taking notes on how to kill your husband now, have you, lately?
no, not recently.
All right, good. Yeah. People that watched the previous podcast will get that inside
They would
joke.
understand that reference.
Yeah. But yeah, for today, me and you well, not today, but like yesterday or the past 2 days, me and you had discussed some men's rights on a Twitter thread. And, what jump started it was that I brought up some of the differences that in society, how society treats the sexes.
I mean, there are some glaring differences, but there's a lot of subtleties about it too that most people don't notice.
Yeah. For example, like in the specific Twitter thread I'm bringing up, it's like, I brought up how we're more inclined to show empathy towards whatever situation a woman finds herself in than
Yeah.
we really are a man.
Well, I mean, if you take it and do a similar situation, you just replace, a man dealing with it or a woman dealing with it, specifically like, domestic abuse or something. Most of the time, like, men are actually mocked for being abused. Like, it's seen as like weakness or something, but we don't treat women that way for
Yeah.
the exact same issue.
I mean, even in cases where the woman's actually quite bigger than the man,
Yeah.
like I've had some, for example, bodybuilding type of women that have literally beat down their non bodybuilding men, and that still happens.
Yeah, but because they're women, it's not viewed
Yeah.
as poorly, I guess,
Yeah. And I
because
mean,
women.
like, the topic that when in the Twitter thread that I got into with you was on basically how we basically treat something as grievous as infanticide.
Hmm.
Like even in those horrible cases, like how we really treat things. Like for example, if there was to be an epidemic of men slam dunking their newborn children into dumpsters, I mean, the first inclination of people would generally not be to set up safe havens.
Right.
The first inclination people would think about would be, quite rationally so, I believe, would be to just lock the men away.
I say arrest them.
Yeah, but however, there is a bit of a disconnect when women do the exact same thing.
Well, I mean, I've seen these cases where a woman like gives birth somewhere and leaves the baby to die and everything, and she usually like sometimes yes, she'll get arrested and everything, but if she is like convicted of anything, the charges are usually far less than they would be if a man was convicted of doing the exact same thing.
Yeah, I mean, usually the most that I've ever seen a woman get charged when it comes to that is she'll get charged with negligence
Hmm.
and not murder.
Or sometimes manslaughter at
Yeah,
best, just depending on the circumstances, really.
and even generally, even in cases where the woman does get charged like that, many times there'll be advocates that will just say, "Well, this is too harsh on like even if it's something like a year or two in prison." They'll say, "Oh, that's too harsh. You have to think about her circumstances."
Yeah, but you never hear somebody saying that about a man who kills his child.
Yeah, I know. No one
Like, what
really
about his circumstances? What drove him to do that?
I know, like and on one hand, I do get the idea because there is some things that are so grievous that you don't really care about the backstory of the person that's
Yeah.
doing. I do get that because I mean, on one hand, yeah, you do want to be understanding of the circumstances that people find themselves in, but you don't want to do that to such an extent where you're sort of what's the
You don't
word?
want to be completely heartless, but you don't want to be like a bleeding heart about it either, you know?
I
You
mean, you
have to
don't
be
want to
find that
also make it seem
balance.
like you're making excuses for the person for what they did.
Yeah. Trying to justify and rationalize what they did.
Yeah, so I mean, I think there is a fine line between doing either.
Yeah, there's a lot of nuance to it for sure.
Well, I mean, like for example, like if you bring up, for example, a school shooting, yeah, on one hand, you do want to bring up, mental illness, you know, horrible family upbringings, and
I say
you want to
usually
bring
that
up all that, but
does.
you don't also want to deny that the people that did the crime were horrible people for doing that.
I mean, usually, especially with school shooters, there always tends to be a lot of red flags that show up well before the shooting, but a lot of times it is ignored.
I mean, what's funny is about it is that I like to compare serial killers to serial killers. Like when you compare Ted Bundy to, I believe it was a woman that was named Eileen Warrenkos or something like that.
Eileen Warnos, yeah, Texas, I believe.
Yeah, when you compare the cases, even though I'm not sure if Eileen killed more men than Bundy
No,
killed women,
Bundy had a much larger body count.
uh, but I mean, well, when you compare how the cases are treated, I mean, you get a lot more sympathy for Eileen than you do the Bundy.
Well,
Even though one could maybe argue that Bundy had a much more tragic backstory.
he really didn't compare to Eileen Warnos. Like I would say a better comparison for something like that would be like Ted Bundy versus Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, Ted Bundy
Well,
did have some trauma in his life, but Jeffrey Dahmer had a pretty normal upbringing.
oh yeah, well, I mean that's
Like
actually
no
better. Let's go with
abuse.
Jeffrey Dahmer versus Eileen Warrenkos.
But yeah,
Yeah,
Eileen Warnos, I do like that she actually did get the death penalty for her crimes, despite having a tragic and somewhat understandable background and motive. Because I do believe a lot of hers probably really was like post traumatic stress disorder. And, in the moment, like in the heat of the moment, I don't think she was in her right mind when she did what she did. But, she wasn't legally insane either. Like she knew what she was doing was wrong.
yeah. I mean, we can compare Jeffrey Dahmer to her case and see how differently they're treated. Uh, like, how we brought up is like when we bring up a guy like Jeffrey Dahmer, our first instinct is to, not even to care about his backstory.
It doesn't even really factor in for a lot of people. Like what he did was just so horrific and so evil that you don't care what the reason was.
But, with a woman, like no one's going to bring up for Jeffrey Dahmer his, you know, like his mental attitudes.
I think
But
Eileen Wuornos was a bigger deal than Jeffrey Dahmer for a lot of people because, yes, she is a woman, because people were thinking, okay, they tend to ask themselves what drives a woman to do stuff like this, and they care more about that reason than they typically do men.
yeah, so you'll hear a lot of mental illness being brought up by people that would want to defend what Ivy Warcos did, but wouldn't hear the same thing with Jeffrey Dahmer.
Yeah.
So I mean, I think that is part of what I call the empathy gap. I mean, in society, it tends to show more empathy towards the plight of women than they does men.
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah, I mean, and and this is reflected when we look at crime statistics. When we compare, apples to apples, and we compare men to women crimes, and they said it's shown like even when you take in income background, like Sonia, I believe her name was Sonia Starr, she factored in criminal sentencing, she factored in income and really all the most important factors into it. And she
Yeah.
showed even if you put those factors into place, men still get charged more with, get more time in prison for the same crimes as men, as women.
They typically do. I mean, and okay, like rape would be a good crime to look at. If a woman sexually assaults a man, her sentence and everything, if she's even convicted most of the time, is really and truly a lot less than most men get.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, pretty much. What's funny is it depends also on who she raped. Like, if a woman sexually assaults a boy, many people will just joke about it and say, "Oh, well, he must have liked it."
I say, look at what happens when like teachers molest a student. If it's a male teacher and a female student, everybody's outraged. If it's a female teacher but a male student, they're like high-fiving him, patting him on the back, and
Yeah, even though
I
that
mean, it's
same
still
kid
like
might be
he
growing
was
up to
still
be.
traumatized. He was still assaulted, but they're like telling him it was a good thing.
Yeah, well, not just that. It's like they'll completely dismiss the fact that he's, obviously he's going, like, they did studies on this and they showed that many times these boys will face the same amounts of trauma as women who go through the similar thing.
Yeah, I mean, a sexual assault is just as traumatic for men as it is for women, but a lot of people just, I don't know, they don't have that view of it.
Mhm. Well, yeah, it's especially because the thing about it is that a man's masculinity is often tied to his sex, the amount
Yeah,
of sex or the amount of sex he has.
it's it's seen as like a sign of virility almost.
Yeah, whereas with women often their femininity is often measured by the lack of sex that they have.
Yeah, it's considered promiscuous if they have a lot of sex.
Yeah, well, it's not even that. It's like if a woman decides to take a purity thing, or like she's abstinence until marriage. Like we generally see that as, oh, that's a nice thing that she's doing. But
Yeah,
if a man takes the exact same pledge, then he
people
gets
kind of look
laughed
at it
at.
sideways. Yeah.
Yeah, so society. And I think that's sort of how there's a difference when it comes to that. Where I do think some of it's biological, but I also think that it's somewhat social as well.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
you get a lot of these people saying that it's either one or the other. It's black and white. I'm like, no, I mean, a lot of times it's a combination of the two,
yeah, it's a gray area.
biological and social construct.
Mhm.
Because a lot of
Well,
our social constructs are
yeah,
based on our basic biological structure.
mhm. Yeah. Well, people fail to realize is that men are often grown up to be what you would call sexual egalitarians,
Right.
where men are taught that they don't have a right to be picky about who they have sex with, and they're supposed to give every woman a shot.
You see all these third wave feminists now basically saying that exact thing. Like, if a man doesn't want to sleep with them, then they're just this horrible, horrible person. But
Mhm.
women are allowed to be picky.
Yeah, I know. So it is a sort of a double standard.
Yeah.
But that has a huge biological basis as well because in societies, despite what they say, men didn't get as much choices as they would like to imagine.
Yeah.
I mean, like for example, a big combination they'll say that women are being controlled sexually is they'll bring up like the Bible where women were arranged to be married.
Yeah.
And I like to bring up the fact you do realize that that was often the case for the men as well.
I was about to say the men didn't get to pick their wives. The wives and the husbands were picked for each other.
Yeah, by their parents.
Yeah.
And what's funny is they'll say, even when I point out those examples, they'll say, well, the man could easily walk out if he wanted to. And I'm like, if that was the case, why would we have tons of legal text showing how, whenever a man did try to get out of it, he would be rejected?
I say sometimes there were major sociological ramifications within the community and everything for him if he decided to, what they would consider, abandon his responsibility or, his obligation.
Well, yeah, I mean, for example, like very often, if a man wanted to divorce a woman, he didn't have to have a reason. He had to have a good reason.
Yeah.
And, so a man couldn't just, and what's funny is that you'll see this where, even in the Bible, you'll see this where men try to paint their wives as adulteress in order to get out of marriage.
Yeah.
Even when they don't really have evidence of that.
I think that's still happening. That's still pretty common in like the Middle East, especially in the Islamic cultures now. Like
Yeah.
women, they can't claim that, their husband cheated because basically they got to have like 7 witnesses or something, and they got to be like male family members or something. But, the husband can say, oh, yeah, she cheated on me and everything, and they can like stone her to death.
Well, yeah. Although I will say this is like what's funny is that those sentences are actually more rarely given out than you would think they are.
Yeah, I just know it is still within the doctrine.
Yeah, I get that, but I mean, that's what people, funny enough, don't really get is that there have been some scholars that have gone to the Middle East and, American scholars that have gone to the Middle East and actually studied how often that they do these barbaric treatments,
Yeah.
like cutting off someone's hand for thieving. And like
Yeah.
they've said, like over a 5-year period, they've only done it like 2 or 3 times.
And I mean, that actually makes me happy. Like, I don't mind, admitting, like, okay, yeah, it happens way less than I thought it did, because that's actually a good thing. So,
Yeah, well, I mean, no, and people don't ever get the reason why they do it in the first place, why they have that on the book. The point is, it's sort of to act as a deterrent.
yeah, we consider it extreme, but even in the Bible, you know, eye for an eye, all that kind of stuff, thievery and everything was usually punished very harshly.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of to act as a it's in the Middle East. It's sort of to act as a deterrent. And funny enough, I remember people on the left will say, "Well, look at how low the crime rate is," and in you know in let's say Sweden, and I say, "Well, look at Saudi Arabia. They have a low crime rate too."
Well, it's all dependent, too, on what they classify as crimes, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think what really determines the crime rate is whether you're liberalizing the laws, making less laws on the book,
Yeah.
or if you're having a more deterrent-based system in which in the Middle East countries they're very much a deterrent-based system.
Right.
They put a great deal of weight on deterring crime over liberalizing it, meaning
Yeah.
the laws
And the
that they have,
physical punishment, like harsh physical punishment.
yeah. And not just that, not just do they do it harsh physical punishment, but they do it in public.
Uh-huh. They make a show, an example of somebody.
Yeah. Well, I mean, because the reason why they do that is because, very often a man that gets whipped out in public, they'll say, what they'll say is that, like what men that have gone through that will say is they'll say that the shame that they got from their community afterwards for
Oh yeah.
being that person was worse than the actual beating.
I was about to say usually just the humiliation aspect of it is demoralizing. So like people tend to not want to go through that more than once.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that is sort of how we really phrase things in society. Another common thing is we in society we do put an emphasis more on violence being done to women than we do men.
Well, I think no, because men actually are more statistically likely to be victims of violent crime than women are. But
Mhm.
yeah, you do hear about women more often, but men tend to attack one another,
Yeah.
like
Well, I mean, here's the
overwhelmingly.
thing: it's like it's because men have been socially conditioned from the moment they can understand a command not to hit women.
Yeah. And that's
But
another,
they're
this is one of my unpopular opinions, But I have always said, like, if a woman is going to put her hands on a man, then he is well within his rights to fight back and defend himself
Yeah.
physically.
I
So,
mean, I
like,
believe
you don't
equal
if you
rights come
want
with
to put
equal
yourself in
lefts
such
as well.
situations, but that's what I've told Daniel because he's a bear of a man. He's so much bigger than I am, and we've had our arguments and everything, but neither of us have laid a hand on each other, and I don't ever see that happening. But he told me, he was like, "You're little." He was like, "All I got to do is wrap you up in a bear hug, and you can't do anything." He's like,
Well,
"I
I
don't
mean,
have to hit you or anything."
mhm. Yeah. I mean, but that's a sort of a thing. That's sort of a double standard. What that we have is that we teach men from a very early age to not hit women,
Hmm.
but we don't really teach the opposite. We don't
I
teach
mean,
women not to hit men.
I've always raised the tiny tyrant. Like, unless you are defending yourself, don't hurt other people. Like, don't just do it to do it. Don't do it because you're angry at them,
Well, I mean,
Because that's
here's what's
wrong.
funny that
That's
people don't
assault.
realize about this is that even though how vastly different the West is from the Middle East, they do still align with each other a lot more than you would think on violence against women in many cases.
Yeah,
Like they come to the conclusion through different means, but they come to the same conclusion.
right. They just kind of approach it from different angles.
Yeah, for example, in the West, a reason why we would give for why a man shouldn't hurt a woman is because, think of the harm you're doing to the woman. It's very individualist sanctioned.
Yeah,
Um, but in the Middle East, it's also sort of, they also come to that same conclusion about men hitting women, despite what you may be taught about that, because they'll say, well, it's shameful for a man to hit a woman. You'll do dishonor to yourself and your family.
yeah.
So, so in a way, they both come to the same sort of, I would say, chivalric conclusion, but they come to it through two different methodologies.
Speaking of chivalry, like, everybody says chivalry is dead, but it's the third wave feminists that have been killing it?
Well, no, what's actually funny, now, I've actually said it's from, I mean, yes, feminists are sort of killing it, but not in the way you would think. What they've really done is that they've eliminated the honor aspect of a man upholding chivalry.
I said they don't consider it honorable. They consider it condescending and patronizing. And
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I held the door like this has been a little while, but walking into a gas station once, there was a woman coming up close behind me. So when I walked in, held the door open for her, she got mad at me, talking about how I'd been brainwashed by men and everything. So I shut the door in her face and said, "Fine, you open it then."
That's a good
Like, I don't
girl.
understand. I don't understand why being polite like set her off so bad.
Yeah, I don't ever get that. I mean, I was taught, funny enough, my parents to open the door for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, I do it for anybody. Like, if I get to a door first, I just hold it open for the next person coming in or, going
Yes.
out or whatever. It's just, I don't know. And I guess maybe that's like the Southern in me because we were just raised to have manners and be polite and courteous to other people.
Yeah. I mean, as long as they have the same skin color as you, obviously. Uh,
That's what I've heard anyway.
yeah. But I mean, I think that it's just sort of this. I personally think that what they've taken away from chivalry is that the sort of pat on the back a man would get for going through with it.
Yeah.
Like they've taken that away, but they still hold the same expectations of men that we've had for thousands of years.
Well, that's what like me and Daniel were talking about because I told him what me and you were going to be talking about,
Mhm.
and we he showed me this girl on Twitter, and I think her handle is Roma Army 2, the number 2. But
Yeah.
she had put out a tweet, and it was really good. Hang on, because I think you'll like it too, because I completely agreed with it. Talking about the like double standards and everything. But I'll have to link you some of her tweets.
Mhm.
This one says, women, just because I have a nice body and I'm dating you does not mean I have to have sex with you. Then the same women, my man is rich and doesn't buy me whatever I want. Oh my God, he's trash. She said, so y'all want equality, but only women are allowed to break free of sexist standards?
Yeah, I mean, I've said, in society, I mean, women are valued for their sex, but
Mm-hmm.
men are valued by their success.
Yeah.
I mean, and what's funny is that they never realize how biologically ingrained this mindset
That's
is.
what I was just about to say. Like, you know, there's this innate sense in every human being that like men are the providers, the protectors.
Mhm.
You know, women are like the nurturers and, the mothers and the caretakers and everything. This is a natural thing, and I don't know why people get so upset about that. Like it's a bad thing. It's not a bad thing.
I mean, to me, it all depends on the users of something. I mean, like I've said this before, and I've even gotten some men's rights advocates mad at me for saying it, but personally, I don't view tribalism or hypergamy as a bad thing in of itself. What makes them bad is who's using it.
And how they're using it.
Yeah. Um, for example, hypergamy in its purest form, like when it comes in its most virtuous form, is basically a woman saying, like, I want the man that can provide me the most resources so I can have, healthy children and, raise a good family.
Yeah.
Now, that's hypergamy in its most basic, in most understandable and virtuous way of understanding it. But, the way a lot of women nowadays are using it, they're using it as just a way to extract money from men. Now,
They've become like her personal ATM basically.
yeah, that's how it is. I mean, it's one thing to say that I want a man that has the tools of providing with him, so we can have a family unit. The difference between saying that and saying, "Oh, I just want a man that I can use for money."
Yeah, the other day those people that were all over me about Daniel being sick and everything. That one girl was talking about like, oh, Laura's already admitted that she only married him because, he could provide for her. I said, when we met and everything and we got together, I said, I was making more money than he was. So the only reason that I quit my job was because my mom got sick, and that was the same year Catherine started kindergarten. Like, and I was burning myself down to the ground trying to do everything. So
Well, I
he had
mean,
the ability to, take care of everything so that I could build our family and take care of our family. So,
besides, I mean, aren't they the same people that say women should have more choices?
yeah, exactly. But if you don't make the choices that they approve of, like you're this awful person.
Yeah, like if like a woman that chooses to be a housewife, they get a lot of crap for them, which I think is wrong. That is a problem that women legitimately have.
I mean, I
It's
get
like,
it mostly from the left too, the ones that, talk about being for women's rights and everything. But when I'm allowed to make a decision for myself like that, was the best thing I could possibly do for my family, somehow I'm also like bad.
I mean, well, just remember you have eternal misogyny.
Yeah. That's always funny to me.
Yeah, I mean, basically, it's like saying if you don't think like them, you have a defect in your own way.
I mean, they are the ones that talk about like everybody's a bigot and everything, but the minute you don't think like they do, the tolerance goes right out the window.
Yeah. And I remember what's funny is like I remember I've gotten a lot of feminists on me, and the first thing that I know that their response to me is going to be from the moment I say it. But I've said, like, they say, like, they'll bring up to me how independent women are. And I've actually made the comment that if you look at welfare, women are actually, poor women especially, are more dependent on men than they were 200 years ago.
Yeah, I can see that.
Because 200 years ago, a very poor woman, she could just have her father, find some man with money, and she would just be completely dependent on that one man,
Right.
economically speaking. Whereas today, with the welfare, since men do pay more in taxes overall, and they're more the producer class. I mean, so basically, you're a poor woman is now not just dependent on one man like she was 200 years ago. Now she's dependent on the entire male uh, taxpayer bracket.
And I mean, you can honestly thank the government for that because they've incentivized this kind of thing, like especially in minority communities. I mean, keep in mind, not all that long ago, like fatherless homes in black communities were almost unheard of until
Mhm.
they started doing all the welfare thing, which incentivized single parent homes.
Mhm. I mean, what it also did is it sort of gave women the notion of a saying of where, well, it gives women the impression where they say, all right, well, I'm not going to get with you if you can't provide to me more than what the government can give to me.
Yeah.
So, in a way, it demoralizes men because basically it's telling men that they have to compete with the government, which even Bill Gates can't do.
Right.
Even with all the vast amount of wealth Bill Gates has, he can't make money printer go burr like the government can.
Yeah, I mean, him, Elon Musk, all that. Like, the whole thing with Elon Musk and United Nations had me cracking up, but
Well, I mean, how come no one ever brings up the fact that Elon Musk is technically the richest African American in history?
because he doesn't have the right skin color.
Yeah, even though he is technically African American.
Mm-hmm.
He was born in South Africa. He came to America and he got citizenship. So he is, by all intents and purposes, African American.
That's what I was talking to somebody about the other day. I forget who, but talking about, like, African American, just the term. I was like, unless you were actually born in Africa and then immigrated here, you are not African American. You're just American.
Yeah, I know. Which I've always found that funny when I was explaining that to one of my black friends. I've said I've known plenty of black people in America that couldn't tell you where Africa was on the map, let alone, they're calling themselves African American. I'm saying, would you rather be living here or Africa? And they'll simply say, yeah, I'd rather live here. And, I'll tell them that is like, what's funny is like, not many people know this about me, but I actually won. I came in like, I actually competed in Black History Month at my elementary school, like a contest about testing your historical knowledge
Right.
in Black history. And what's funny is I got partnered with a woman, a black woman, that didn't even know who Martin Luther King Jr. was.
Seriously.
Yeah, like she seriously did not know. Like when they asked us the question, who gave the "I Had a Dream" speech. She literally could not tell me, and I said it's Martin Luther King Jr. She says, "Who's that?"
Oh, God.
And I literally face palmed myself.
Yeah, that's
Like,
pretty bad.
I mean, when a white person knows your history better than you do, that's really saying something, and not anything good it's saying.
Tonight I got told that the racists in Virginia didn't want the truth to be told in schools about, that slavery was bad and everything. I was like, this has been taught in schools for as at least as long as I've been alive.
I know. I
Like,
mean,
it's
it's
part of basic history. Like,
like, I mean, I've been going like, I personally myself went to a middle school that was located right aside the ghettos, and I mean, really, they didn't have to teach you about slavery because, all the black people there would be more than willing to tell you about it themselves.
right.
And I mean, the teachers did teach it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember all throughout, like, elementary, middle, and high school, going over the civil rights movement, Jim Crow laws and just how awful it all was. And
well, they never also tell you they bring up white privilege all the time, but they never bring up the fact that all of these policies, whether it be slavery, Jim Crow laws, etc.,
mm-hmm.
they all benefited one particular class of white people, and that's the elite, the upper middle class to the elite class. Poor white people got thrown under the bus a lot of times with all of them.
Yeah, that's what a lot of people don't understand. There are a lot of poor white people right outside in the cotton fields, right alongside the blacks.
Yeah, here's what they fail to mention: that like during slavery, it was very common to see a lot of unemployed white people because here's the thing is like, why would a business owner want to hire poor white people when he can just get a slave?
Right, and not have to pay them.
Yes, that, and even with white people that did get hired, their work was often devalued because of the fact that slavery did exist.
Yeah.
So so in a way that poor white people did suffer a great deal about it. Why do you think a lot of the abolitionist movements came around? You think many of them actually came about because of the fact that they had such sincere feelings about how black people were being treated? No, many of them didn't. Some of the abolitionists I've read on were probably more racist than some of the slaveholders were. But, the reason why many of them became abolitionists was because they just seen the economic reality about them.
Right.
And they said, well, wait, we're getting screwed over here. And the only people that are benefiting from this are the rich white people. And, they said, well, we need to do away with this slavery system for our own economic survival. And so that, and funny enough, what people fail to realize is that, to go back into men's rights, that there were more laws on the book about how to treat black female slaves fairly than there were how to treat just black male slaves.
I don't know if I've heard about that.
Yeah, it's true. Now, granted, someone would make the argument, well, they never enforced those, which, there is a good point. But I say, like, the fact that a bunch of rich white elitists were able to sit into a room and say, we need to put on the books that, how slave owners should treat, black female slaves, but not put anything on the book for the male slaves. That really tells you something.
Trying to make it. Yeah, I'm trying to rack my brain here. Some of my medicine's kicking in now, but because I want to say I do know what you're referring to, because I think I had a history teacher that talked about it, but now I can't remember any of the details.
There's a reason why the life expectancy of black male slaves was a lot lower than that of the female slaves. It's because more often than not, the black male slaves would be the ones that are more worked to death.
Oh yeah.
But no one really likes to tell that story about how even sexism was portrayed even in slavery.
I think sexism, that's one of those things, just by nature of being human, we're always going to deal with. Like, and there was like one of the girls that was talking to you about like the men's rights people that just hate women. Yeah, there definitely are those people, Like I think half of them do.
I respond to that.
I haven't really looked again at any of these threads, so I hadn't kept up with it in a few minutes.
What I said is, I can assure you that I hate all people equally.
Okay, yeah, I did see that one.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, most of the time, men's rights advocates are not against men or women per se. They're against gynocentrists and people that believe in institutional hypergamy, which basically, favoring females over men
Yeah.
and basically making men into tax slaves. You
I mean,
know,
that's something I've always been on board with as far as the men's rights movement is, and especially now with the trans stuff. Like, if anybody can be a woman, there's nothing inherently special about being a woman. So I don't understand why there is this gynocentric kind of ideal with a third wave feminist that, women are somehow superior to men. Because, I mean, if a man can be a woman if he just decides to, then that kind of erases
it
all of
really
that.
ways. Although I do piss off curves my own self because I do personally go with some of the trans activist policies. But I go
Like,
with them for different reasons. I mean, I believe if there's anything that the trans rights activists are going into that I do like, it's that they're really challenging the woman-centered nature of politics.
yeah, I mean, I like it that they're talking about, Kamala Harris, the first woman vice president and everything. I'm like, well, all Mike Pence would have had to do is just say, I identify as a woman, and there you go.
Yeah, I remember how funny it was with people with Mike Pence. They got on him for saying that he followed the Billy Graham rule, where he doesn't enter any building with a woman
But say
unless his
he's never
consent.
alone with a woman who is not like his wife or his mother.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's not alone with a woman unless his wife is present.
Or, as I guess at work or something, if he's got, somebody else as a witness, kind of a chaperone type deal,
And I'm saying,
which I like the Pence rule. I mean,
the fact that I'm not a religious man, I completely embrace the Billy Graham rule myself.
well, it's not even necessarily a religious thing. I mean, especially nowadays with all the false allegations against men and everything, it's just prudent, self defense, basically.
Basically, when
Don't
women
ever
are
be
getting
alone with a member of the opposite sex so that they can't ever make up a story about you that nobody else can verify.
yeah, I mean, what's funny about it is that, like, it's especially in a culture where women get oppression points for, you know, outing a man, you know, so when they get those oppression points, I'm saying, yeah, I'm going to have a witness with me.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
mean, even Daniel is like that,
mhm.
He'll tell me like even at church or something, he doesn't like to be cornered like somewhere by, another female member of the church or something, but even just in general at work, some of the receptionists at the shop and everything, he wouldn't be alone with them or anything like that because I don't know, it's just you never know these days.
Yeah. Another thing I'd like to get into you with is like the way society is different with men and women is when it comes to the suicide rates.
Oh,
Like,
white men have like the highest risk of suicide in this country.
yeah, and men in general, they have a higher suicide rate than women,
Yeah.
especially men that are going through, like, especially people that are going through divorce. It's not uncommon for a man to kill himself during a divorce settlement.
Yeah, stuff like that because I mean that gets into their finances, their, financial well-being and a
Well, I
lot of times, even kids are taken away from them, so
mean, yeah, I mean, what people don't really realize about, like, I, from a lot of perspective, we come from a female perspective, and from a female perspective, having a like $20 being like, let's say, for example, having $50 taken away from you I mean, while it sucks, obviously, I mean, it's not like your femininity is tied to that.
Yeah.
Whereas with a man, when he has money and resources taken from him, it's his masculinity and his potential ability to have future relationships with women that's taken away from him.
Yeah, like I said, is this just innate sense in men to be, providers. So
Yeah,
you take
because
away their
what's
ability to
funny
provide, then
about is that if a man's paying alimony to one wife, like his ex-wife, and he gets married again, it's not uncommon where the wife that he's with currently has to help him pay the alimony to his ex-wife,
yeah.
which, you know, I mean, why would a woman want to marry a man that's into that position of where he's paying alimony to his ex?
And then she becomes also financially responsible for it.
Yeah, so I mean, in a way, it disincentivizes married men from, I mean, men from being able to get married again,
Right.
even if they want to. Whereas it doesn't have the same effect with women, like, because I mean, what it does for women is it incentivizes them not to get married too, in some ways, because they know, well, it incentivizes them not to get married sometimes, because sometimes if they get married, the alimony gets taken away from them. But in
Yep.
some cases, it's under lifetime alimony. No, she can keep that even if she does get married again,
Yeah.
which, you know, it'll also incentivize a woman not to work because, she'll say, well, why do I have to work when I can be assured that I'm going to get a check at the end of the month from my ex-husband?
That's guaranteed money.
Yeah. And very often, sometimes it's depending on who she married, sometimes it can be more money than she would make getting a job.
Mm-hmm.
So, it does put women in that situation where they don't want to work anymore. You know, another common, since me and you are obviously also anti-abortion,
Yeah.
a common thing that also does come up with that is sex selective abortion, and that's where feminists really, raise their hands in the air, even though they're pro-choice most of the time.
Well, when you
Like they'll
press
say,
them on stuff
it's
like
sex
that,
selective
even
abortion.
do what you cut out.
Oh, I said, well, feminists will rave against sex selective abortions while also being completely for abortions in general.
I don't know that I've ever seen one oppose sex selective abortion, or even I've even confronted quite a few on race, like telling them like, okay, if a white woman gets pregnant by a black man and she doesn't want to have a black baby, are you saying that you still support her aborting that baby simply because it's black? And a lot of times, they'll kind of balk at that, but they never say that they oppose it.
Yeah. I mean, they'll say sex selective abort. Like the feminists that oppose it, they won't oppose it so much because it's abortion. They'll oppose it and say, well, because usually most of the time it's women that are the ones that get aborted in that.
Yeah.
What they'll say is how that just shows you that how deep sexism is in society. And what I like to point out is they never explain outside of my sexism why that societies choose the men over the women in those cases.
Yeah, I mean
It's
that's
because,
that's a big thing in what, China especially.
yeah. Well, what they don't tell you about in China, for example, it's that in China, only a man can be sued by his parents for not taking care of them in an older age.
Yeah.
The woman can't, even if the woman's making more money than the son is, she can't be sued. She can't be sued by the parents for not taking care of them in an elderly age.
Okay.
Whereas the son, the man, can be sued by the parents. So, I mean, basically, what that's telling parents is that if they're going to have one child, they should prioritize from an economic they have an economic incentive to prioritize men
Right.
because that's the only person that they can guarantee will take care of them when they get older. Whereas they can't have that same hope with a woman.
Yeah.
You know, and another thing is that in many of these cases, societies, like the man is the one that holds the family together. So they see, they want a man that, like, so they tied the man to family survival because these are the people that they can sell out for labor. We talk a lot about sex trafficking, but there's also a big problem when it comes to work trafficking.
I think it was you that had pointed out to in an abortion thread or something somewhere. Somebody was talking about, men don't have their bodily autonomy rights taken away, and you were like, well, yeah, they do. Because we
Yeah,
have a lot of laws and everything that force them to do things, even if they don't want to do it.
yeah. I mean, I like to point out conscription, circumcision, the fact that there are more ways a woman can be raped than a man by the opposite sex. You know, there, and the fact that a big justification for child support, if you read the literature, it's to be a tax on male promiscuity.
Yeah.
So yeah, men's bodily autonomy are constantly striked at.
That, I think it was another time you mentioned, like, the draft, like, they're forced, even against their will, that if need be, they're called up to go to war.
Yeah, so I mean, I've said uniquely, bodily autonomy in America is a gendered issue because
That's
no
what
one's
I always tell them,
talking
that it cannot
about
possibly be a basic human right.
the ways that women might hypothetically be forced to do something.
Yeah, I always tell them now that, they can't make the argument that bodily autonomy is a basic human right because it doesn't apply to every human being.
Yeah,
Like, the child damn sure doesn't have bodily autonomy rights. And basically, men really don't either. It's only for women. So that cannot be a basic human right.
I know. I mean, because until like 2013, it wasn't even considered a possibility in America for a man to be able to be raped. And feminists will often claim that that's a way that they help men because feminist groups are one of the groups that fought to change the definition of rape, which included men in it.
Yeah.
I like to point out this simple fact: they didn't change the definition so that men could be included. They changed the definition because under the old definition, there were women that were being left out. And they changed the definition because, they wanted to include more women in it. And it just so happened that by expanding what it was, to include more women, they had to include men in it.
Right.
And there's still ways that a man, like, obviously, particularly it would seem to us that a man's being raped, when in reality, the law doesn't say that it counts as a rape. Like, for example, made to penetrate.
Yeah.
So basically, a woman could drug a man with a cocktail of a roofie and Viagra, tie him down to a bed, and force herself onto him and make him penetrate her. And under the law, that's not rape.
Right.
And in fact, if she was a little bit tipsy herself at the time of doing it, she can claim that the man she raped her
Yep.
because she was a bit tipsy at the time.
I like it too that
So,
women can just regret a sexual encounter and say, in hindsight, I was raped. I know, regret is not rape.
I mean, you making a stupid decision at a party to sleep with this man that you barely know and you don't even like. I mean, it's a sucky situation, but it's, it's not rape. It's you being
Exactly.
stupid.
Yeah.
Use that. I mean, what's funny is men intuitively know this. Like, if I get drunk and I wind up in bed with a woman that I think looks disgusting, I'm not going to say, well, man, she really took advantage of me sexually. I'll say, well, I need to stop drinking alcohol when I'm
Yeah.
going out to parties.
Yeah, but that's called personal accountability, and most people these days don't like that.
I mean, you know,
You're cutting out again.
a new thing that's coming out, like that feminists are really hammering on about, is this orgasm gap.
Do what now?
You've heard of that? Have you ever heard of that?
Sorry, I lost you a little bit there. What were you saying?
Well, a new thing that feminists are really focusing on nowadays is the apparent orgasm gap.
There's an orgasm gap?
Well, basically, the argument is that there's some empirical studies on this. It shows that men have orgasms more than women do,
I just
and
thought that was common sense, but to me that means that like women need to communicate what they want in bed better.
what they'll show is that in heterosexual sex, women have less orgasms than their male partner, and that in lesbian sex, women have more, or like lesbians have more orgasms than heterosexual couples, like heterosexual women.
I mean, a woman obviously is going to know what a woman likes. So that's why like it may be too much information, but that's the reason I have a great sex life because me and Daniel always communicated what we liked with each other. So we
Yeah,
learned and we have a very fulfilling sex life now.
yeah. I mean, oh, trust me, there's nothing off the books with me here. But yeah, like like you said, this might get me unpopular points, but like I personally believe pleasure and happiness is an individual responsibility.
Well, yeah,
Like no one has a no one's a mind reader and knows exactly what makes you have pleasure or be happy.
exactly. You have to communicate these things, you know?
Yes, I mean, what there's also what I call it's not an orgasm gap, it's a social expectation gap. Like for a man, to get into the position where he has sex, he has to show himself as a provider. He has to put the work into it. Whereas a woman just has to say yes.
Yeah.
So I mean, so for a man, getting to the point of sex is a journey. So a man prioritizes his orgasm because that's him getting that's basically him getting to the finish line.
Yeah.
Like that's him being achieving something. Whereas with women, it's not the same. Sort of like, I mean, to me, it's the difference between you having to run an entire marathon by yourself to comparing it to someone that they plop you right on the finish line about a few inches before the finish line. I mean, you know, and not just that, they also don't take into consideration that women are more likely than men to have what they call it sexual disorders.
I think I've read that before.
Like
Women
set
women
of
tend to have a little more hang-ups about sex, but I think that kind of is social conditioning too.
Well, I mean, from a from like they've actually did this thing, like from a biological standpoint, like there are, like in America at least, 30% of women just can't orgasm.
That just makes me feel sad.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter their partner or whatever. Biologically, they're just unable to have orgasms, at least vaginal orgasms.
I think I know what you're talking about too, because didn't the study also say that like usually they could achieve orgasm on their own, just that it was more of a struggle with a partner.
Well, I mean, I think it can go either way, but I think that is most correct. Uh, where and it's just makes, and I think it's another thing is that the another thing is that we do sort of feel more sad for women that can't orgasm than we do men. Once again, the empathy gap. Because I mean, if a woman can't orgasm due to say a sexual disorder, our first instinct is to comfort her and say how awful that is. And whereas if a
Think for
man
anybody that has that problem, it's just to
sort of,
feel bad.
if we find out that a man has the same sexual disorder, he's looked at as a loser.
Yeah, I can see where that would come in. Now, like I
Like,
said, me personally, like I feel just as bad for a man that has that problem than I do for a woman, because that's just gonna suck.
yeah, well, I mean, one thing that people don't realize is that you can have a good sex life without orgasms.
But I say it's not necessarily about the orgasm, it's about intimacy, really.
Yeah, and a
Or I
man,
mean, it should be anyway. Most people treat sex so casually that all they want is the orgasm. So
yeah, I mean, a man and a woman can have good sex without orgasms, but the orgasm certainly helps.
if I say I ain't gonna complain.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, I just definitely think that is, a bit of a, like, I think it's a social expectation gap more than anything.
Yeah,
And one person has to go through a journey to have sex, whereas the other person, they just sort of have to say yes. And of course, in that circumstance, the man's going to prioritize, like the man's going to orgasm more because, in his mind, he's worked harder to get there.
right.
And he's literally worked so hard in order to get to the point where he to orgasm. And also, there are some, they don't ever take into consideration gold digging. Like there are some women that are for men with men just for their resources.
Yeah,
And like let's say for example, if the only reason why you were with your husband was for money and resources that he provided you, you know, would you really feel that at all bad if he didn't make you orgasm? Because in reality, whether or not you orgasm, you're getting what you ultimately want out of the relationship.
yeah. I mean,
The
the
orgasm, if anything, could just be a
priority is
benefit on
different.
top of what you're going after. And I think that's really what it does come down to in some circumstances with women. It's where they're shallow and they're going with the man solely for one thing, and they don't prioritize the orgasm because that's not really what they're going after in the relationship to begin with.
Oh yeah, there are absolutely women like that.
Mhm. So, I mean, I also find it funny is like, there is a bit of a double standard with gold digging where if a man's a gold digger, like let's say these examples of a 20-year-old man that dates a 70-year-old woman because of her pension,
Mm-hmm.
we look at him as like, ew, that's gross. You're taking advantage of that poor woman. Whereas if a woman does the exact same thing, where she's a 20-year-old woman going out with a 70-year-old man. Like, very often you'll be called sexist by feminists for saying that woman's just doing it for the money, even though she clearly is.
Right.
So, I do think that that's another example where basically men aren't allowed to be picky and shallow, but women are.
Yeah, I have seen a lot of that, especially again with the new wave feminists.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I mean, they get to have all this criteria. You got to be over 6 feet tall. You got to do this. You got to do that. But if a man says, "Okay, well, here's my criteria," they're like, "Oh, you pig."
Yeah, well, think about it. Like, well, I've said women are attracted to 6'6", 6'6" dick,
Yeah,
six big, coming 6-pack abs, and 6 feet tall.
yeah,
Yeah, women are attracted to 3'6", being 6 feet tall, having a six-figure income, and having a 6-inch at least dick.
yeah.
So they're attracted to the 3'6".
I
And
never heard it described like that, but I know what you're talking about.
yeah, but I always just find it funny how that sort of thing works. Mm, Yeah, and we did bring up a bit about fatherless homes previously, but I do think that it's much more of a problem for men than it is women, even though I will be first to admit that it sucks for women as well.
Yeah, I mean, girls that grow up in fatherless homes do have, certain issues that come along with that, but it does tend to be worse for sons that grow up without fathers.
Well, to me, it's sort of like this. When you have a fatherless home, like a man, like the kid in the boy in the relationship, he doesn't have any, you know, male that he can identify with readily. Whereas with women that grow up in fatherless homes, they don't really have a man that they can just like aspire to know who to get with when they reach that age.
And that's why I am glad, because like I'm very thankful for Catherine's bio dad because without him she wouldn't be here. But at the same time, I do not want her to model her relationships after the type of man he is. So I'm so incredibly thankful that Daniel is in her life now.
Yeah, so that's how it is. Like men want to be like their fathers, and you know, and women, children, female children they want to aspire to get with a man that's as good as their fathers.
Right.
And if their father is a drug addict, an alcoholic, and he's overall just horrible, you'll see multiple times that that's the type of men that many of these women will end up getting with.
Shoot, my daddy's been an alcoholic all my life, and we have a really, really good relationship these days ever since Catherine was born. But before then, growing up and everything, it was really rough. And then when I married Catherine's dad, it turns out that I married like the mirror image of my own dad at the
Yeah,
time. Like he was the same way that my dad was to my mom when I was young.
yeah. And that's not an unusual story. So I'm not going to sit here and say that
It's
men
what I thought
or
was
boys
normal,
are
you know?
be affected by it. But for me, with boys, the difference is like for me, I grew up in a fatherless home myself, and you know, when you grow up in a fatherless home, you don't really have a male that you can aspire to be for a man.
There's no role model there.
Yeah, and when you don't really have the role model, you tend to go to the closest thing next to you. And for many black men, especially, that's gangs.
Oh yeah, that becomes that missing family.
Yeah, because it's not uncommon where you'll find like a teenage black boy that will join a gang because there was an old timey gang member in there like who's 30 or 40 years old who acts as the father that the
Hmm.
boy doesn't have. And so it becomes, the gang becomes the family that and this happens to white boys as well, where that's part of the reason sometimes they join clan groups.
Right. That's just a different version of a gang. So,
Yeah, because, they'll grow up, without the father figure, and they'll just find, they'll find that male influence from somewhere. And oftentimes it's not from a good source. I think it has, a big impact on how, people are raised.
yeah, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I remember when I decided to leave TJ, that's Catherine's dad,
Mm-hmm.
and I was telling my mom about it, and my mom wanted me to stick with it and, try for Catherine. And she told me, she's like, to this day, she's like, and it was the truth. She's like, I'm not mad at you for saying it. She's like, but it is the most painful thing I've ever had to hear. Because I told her, I said, because my mom stayed with my dad for 17 years, even though it was a toxic relationship and, it took a toll on me and my little brother. But I told my mom, I said, look, it's not going to take me 17 years to get out of a bad relationship. I said, I'm not going to have Catherine growing up thinking this is normal.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, it's a bad sort of deal for anyone to go through.
Yeah, I
I
mean, I
mean,
definitely would
it,
not recommend it.
uh, I'm saying, I mean, it wouldn't be especially surprising if you looked into your ex-husband's backstory and you found out that, he also grew up in an abusive household.
I say I don't know if his was abusive, but his dad was just never around either. I mean,
Yeah. I mean, because usually it's a cycle of abuse.
yes, it's a vicious cycle, and it just repeats itself.
And
Which is why
that's
when I
sort of,
decided to walk, I walked because I was like, I got to break the cycle now, or I'm never going to.
yeah. I mean, and that's good that you did that because, I mean, that's how we need to view domestic violence in general. It's like we have to recognize that very often it's a cycle that
Hmm.
both parties need to know how to break.
Yeah, I mean, her dad was abusive and unfaithful, just like my dad was with my mom. So I was like, I can't have, Catherine marrying a man like this. Like, no, because I will go to jail.
Yeah. Mhm. I know. So, I mean, it's a good thing that now she has a more of a role model that she can look after.
And her dad does seem to have matured a little bit over the past couple of years, which is a good thing. But I
Mhm.
still, I don't really trust it.
Yeah, that's fair though. Yeah. So, I mean, and when it comes to domestic abuse, it's like we have this thing called the Duluth model where women are assumed to be the victim no matter what. And I mean, I like to say that this is a such a deal even for women because there are plenty of women that could be helped if people recognize that they could be abusive as well, because then
Hmm.
you could get these women that are abusing their husbands help. So, they could figure out how to stop doing that.
And with women, I think it's almost, I'm not going to say it's worse than the abuse that like men can dish out, but it,
Well,
it is more
that's
mental and emotional.
exactly your party.
Do what?
I mean, usually with women, although there is exceptions, a lot of the abuse is emotional and mental abuse.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, although there is times when it is physical, because what mother, like abusive mothers will do is they will beat their children in front of the man. And, because the woman knows that she can't beat her husband, but she knows she can beat her children because her children are weaker.
Right.
And she'll do that right in front of her husband, and mentally berate him. and say that he's not doing his job. And, so
That reminds
so
me of a woman I
it's,
read about.
yeah. And very, so it'll become very abusive. And what's bad about the Duluth model that outside of it, it does take a narrow view and it gets a bunch of men that are actually being abused themselves into prison.
Yeah.
But it also deprives women from growing their character because they don't allow women to be put into abuser hotlines in a counseling so they in like anger management counseling so that they could get help. So I mean, it's not good for like the Duluth model is not good for either sex, but it's especially heinous to men
Yeah.
because it's automatically as perpetrators even when they aren't, and when they're in
I need
fact
to read the
victims.
story of Michelle Notek, Knotek, because she, I mean, you want to talk about, I got a book on her recently and read it, and I mean, it made me sick to my stomach, the abuse this woman dished out, not only to her children and her husband and everything, but was so manipulative that she got like one of her closest friends to move in, started abusing the friend until the friend actually died, and then her and her husband like burned the woman's body in the backyard.
Oh
But the
wow.
abuse itself was actually just horrific.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just really something about how the Duluth model actually is.
Yeah.
Um, doesn't really help the people that actually need help. And I mean, like we mentioned before, that like there is battering your wife defense,
Yeah.
but there's no battering your husband defense. Like, if a woman kills her husband, she can just claim that he abused her.
Yeah.
However, something that the opposite doesn't exist for men. Even if in those cases where men actually have more evidence than the woman would of abuse.
I'm gonna tag you in a news article about that woman on Twitter real quick before I forget about her name again.
Yeah. So I mean, like, well, especially got me into some men's rights activism is especially my own experience when it came to being sexually abused by a woman, an ex of mine. And I mean, to me, while I obviously think that sexual abuse on a woman is bad as well, I think
Yeah.
there's a different dimension to it when it's a man that's being the one being abused.
The dynamic is completely different.
Well, I mean, because here's the thing: what I've often found that people don't think about is that when a man, when a woman accuses a man of sexually abusing her, I mean, yeah, people might not believe her, but they typically won't believe her because very often the man that she's accusing of has a high status in the community.
Right.
Like he's looked at favorably by people, and that's why they won't believe her. However, when a man gets abused by a woman, it's often that plus the fact that people don't believe it's biologically possible for a woman to rape a man or to sexually abuse him.
I say I've had people talk about well, men will get an erection and everything. I'm like, that's just a biological impulse. It's nothing he can control. Like, what you
I
need,
mean,
pumpkin?
I like to point out that even corpses can get erections.
Yeah, they can. I mean, it's just a neurological response.
Well, not even a neurological response; it's a response from the spinal cord.
Yeah.
Because I mean, that's how even brain dead uh, corpses can get erections because it's all about spinal stimulation.
I've heard about this weird thing that they can apparently do if somebody is like in a coma or, is about to be taken off life support, but the woman still wants to like collect a sperm to have babies.
Yeah.
And they basically like use electric stimulation on the prostate gland to achieve this. And I'm like, whoever thought that up, I'd like to have a word with.
Well, what like there was this one time, like I believe where they extracted the sperm from a dead soldier, like this, like the woman, she wanted to have a baby by her husband who was a soldier.
Yeah.
I don't know if this story is true or not, but it is something interesting to think about like, where she wanted to have a child by him, and so they forcefully, like what you said with the electrical stimulant,
Yeah.
made the guy ejaculate even when he was dead, so that she could have his sperm implanted into her. Which I said, wouldn't this technically be rape?
I mean, I always thought it was weird, especially if somebody was like already dead or on the brink of death. Like,
Yeah.
obviously, they can't consent to this, and they probably didn't even think about it before whatever situation got them there.
Mhm.
So, yeah, to me, there are some kind of moral and ethical gray areas there.
Yeah. I mean, it definitely gets to me when it comes to thinking about that. Because it just goes. Especially when you think of child support as it is, like, um, what people fail to realize is that the government can often be more ruthless than the mafia when it comes to money,
Mm-hmm.
because
Oh, yeah,
very often,
don't
when
get in
it comes
between the
to
government and their
money,
money.
it's the amount of money that you owe them, they just go up to you and kill you, and they're done with it. I said, and the government's not that gracious. The government will make you want to kill yourself first, and even once you've done that, they'll they'll go to the length of selling off your house and whatever ownings that you have in order to pay the child support.
Uh-huh.
So they'll shake your corpse for whatever they can get from it. So I've said that in a way the government's more vicious than the mafia, because the mafia they'll just kill you at some point.
Yeah. You kind of know what you're getting into with the mafia.
And once they kill you, they just leave you alone.
Yeah.
With the government, no, even death doesn't get you out of a debt. They'll shake your corpse for whatever shekels they can get off your body.
Yep.
And so and especially with this is where I've also put in America, only in America that I know of, although I'm sure this probably applies in other Western nations as well, but only in America can DNA evidence be sufficient for you to get out of prison for homicide, but it's not sufficient for you to get off child support. Like, because literally there are cases where it is provenly found that the man's not the father of the children, and the government will say, doesn't matter, you still have to pay child support to this child that it's not even yours biologically.
That's just absurd, but again, that's the government for you, so it's not surprising.
Yeah. So this goes to show you that that shows that a man could go to prison for 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 homicide, for allegedly killing someone, and get out of DNA evidence, get out based on DNA evidence exonerating him. But the same sort of evidence would not be like for the same man. That same sort of evidence would not be accepted to get him out of child support. And and this might be my sexist, misogynist ways, but I would like to imagine that killing someone is more heinous than not paying child support.
Yeah.
That might just be my misogyny talking, but still.
Well, if that's the case, I guess I'm misogynistic too, because I definitely think murder is worse.
well, alleged murder.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So, you know, I always just found that because I mean that just goes to show you about how deep the government is, and you know, maintaining the norm of men as protector and provider.
Hmm.
I'm saying that's basically, I mean, because that's basically what welfare and like what they say universal health care is about. Because men have shorter lives than women and are the least likely to ever use the welfare or the health care.
Yeah,
So I mean, literally men are paying more into a system that they're getting less out of,
and they don't have a choice in it.
which makes it even worse.
Hmm.
I mean, it's one thing like for a man to willingly put more money into a system that he doesn't get as much out of, voluntarily. Like wouldn't fault a man for, let's say, paying for like a private charity to take care of his wife, him and his wife's health care, and he not get, as much as out of it as he's paying in. But if it's voluntary, like he set that up to be like that, and that's one thing. But it's a
Right.
complete other thing when a man's being subjected to that by the government by force. So I mean, like I've said, it's basically mandatory chivalry,
Yeah.
which is
Which
like,
honestly, yeah, it's not chivalry really. So.
well, I mean, it's like mandatory, what do you call it? It's like sort of like mandatory men being providers, um, which, I just think it's an overall messed up system. Well, we've gone on for more than an hour and almost an hour and a half here.
Yeah.
Um, I'm gonna go and get something to eat. Would you like to tell the audience where they can find you and what latest projects you're up to?
I don't really have any recent projects, really. Nothing going on. Just taking care of Daniel mostly. But I am on Twitter at LauraWhitt32. That's LAURAWHITT
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, tell your husband I wish him well.
I will.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming up. I don't know how many more guests I have planned in the future. Hopefully, my friend will recover from his broken wrist that came from masturbating too hard. But yeah. Good night, goodbye, and see you all later.
Bye.